I don't know if I had a choice. I think I'd rather look good on a camera or video rather than in real life. Anyway.
Okay, we're good to go.
All right. Thank you for coming to our endorsement meeting. It's not a debate, but we do encourage you to talk to one another, to draw distinctions between each other politely, without interruptions, if you would. And so we don't, because it's not a debate, we're here to make a decision about an endorsement. We don't necessarily give equal time to candidates. We don't ask you the same questions necessarily, but we do try and give you both the opportunity to make clear who you are and why you're running. So let's start with that. If you Jimmy, if you would start, give us your name and a brief bio and why you're running.
So I'm Jimmy Krumpacker. I was born and raised in Portland, Oregon. Actually just outside the city limits. We can't vote for mayor, but within the 5th district. I'm 7th generation Oregonian. I went to the same grade school that my grandfather went to, same grade school that my parents met at when they were maybe 4 and 6 years old. So,
what grade school?
Riverdale grade school.
Uh-huh.
And then I went to boarding school. I went to a school called St. Paul's School in Concord, New Hampshire. It was a faith-based school. We had chapel 4 days a week. We had school 6 days a week, which was a huge departure from public school. Getting good grades there was really cool. Highly competitive academically. I then went to Georgetown University, where I studied government. While I was at Georgetown, I interned for Gordon Smith, a very smart woman. Gave me some advice to not go straight into politics. That was one of my goals at the time. She said to go into business first, so I went and I worked on Wall Street for 16 years. I focused on the energy markets my last 13 years on Wall Street. Moved back to Oregon. I was in New York City for 10 years. Moved back to Oregon 10 years ago. Got very involved in community organizations. The first thing I did was start delivering for Meals on Wheels, which is what I did with my grandmother. It was called Loaves and Fishes at the time. And then I was asked to join their board. Was on their board for 6 years. During that period, we delivered roughly 1.3 million meals a year to the metropolitan area. I ran the marketing development committee at one time. I was then asked to join the board of Oregon Ballet Theater, which I have to admit I didn't know anything about the ballet, but I was told by one of their founding trustees that they were about to go bankrupt, and that there were 250 full and part-time jobs that were on the line. And so I jumped at that opportunity to help try and save a major arts organization. Became the treasurer within a year. My second year as treasurer, we ran the largest surplus in the history of the company. Then became the youngest chair of the board. We had half of our budget in cash in the bank when I left as chair of the board. I was very proud of that work. We basically doubled, if not tripled, the size of the board while I was there. I was then asked to join the board of the Portland Japanese Garden during their $37.5 million expansion. Help them with fundraising and in certain other capacities, and then was also asked to join the board of the Portland Japanese Garden Foundation, which is a separate board. So I was on 5 nonprofit boards when I jumped at the opportunity to run for office 2 years ago, and tried to fill the vacancy left by Greg Walden. Unfortunately, came up short, but with redistricting, my home in Bend was redistricted in the same district that I was born and raised in Portland. And the reason I'm running is because I believe there are a lot of major issues that Oregonians face from a federal level. I believe inflation right now is at the top of the list, and I think my background on Wall Street, so I can speak to the inflationary pressures that are put on every citizen, whether it's energy prices or food prices. I also believe energy right now is critical, and having energy independence now more than ever is a major issue, especially with the war in Russia-Ukraine. I do believe the federal government has done a very poor job with the 53% of the state that they manage. The timber program that has come down over the last 30 years, I think, has been abysmal, unfortunately. And we're seeing that with our forest fires every year. So there are major issues beyond those, but you said to be brief, so I apologize. That wasn't a brief intro.
So you're saying, thank you for the intro. So you're saying inflation is the top issue right now?
I think it is. I think it is, just because, at 8.5%, this is the largest inflationary pressure we've seen in over 40 years. And I think it was Larry Summers that said it. The Fed has basically managed only 2 of the last 10 inflationary situations well. So I am very worried that we're going to be heading into a recession in the very near future. And I think the bond market also would reflect that. When you go to the gas station and gas prices are 50% higher than they were a year ago, I've heard anywhere from $300 to $500 per family of 4, the average spend year over year for food and energy prices. And that's money that's coming right out of people's pockets, unfortunately, because you can't choose to not spend money on energy, and food I guess you can try to cut down on, but that's not healthy.
All right, let's leave that there for a moment. Laurel, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hey, I'm Laurel Roses. I was born and raised in Clackamas County. My husband was also raised in Clackamas County, born in Multnomah County, but I forgave him for that. Then his family moved out to Estacada. I was born and raised in rural Clackamas County, small community of Boring, which was anything but boring. There were 3 mills and 4 taverns that were open 24/7, so it was kind of Wild West. I started picking berries like every other kid in Oregon. Started picking berries when I was 5 years old because I had a bunch of older siblings, and my mom had just dropped us all off at the berry field, and so I have just kind of that very rural Oregon foundation. I have been involved in the boards and the organizations, and the community service that I have done has been more in a small town and rural community setting than the big city, ballet boards and things like that. It's more like youth soccer boards. I helped get Gleaners of Clackamas County established out in the Molalla area, so families who wanted to, access Gleaner services instead of just standing in line for food boxes, they really wanted to work for the food help that they needed. I led a team out there to help get low-income families signed up and availing themselves of those services. That was super rewarding, very, very good stuff going on in that organization. I've taught piano lessons for 43 years. My husband and I have 6 children. So much of my adult life has been doing the mom thing, trying to multitask, balancing, one kid has basketball here, another has ballet there. I've got piano students showing up, and it's just, micromanaging and making sure everybody gets where they need to be. My children are all grown and gone now, and all just successfully established in their own lives, and they just said, Mom, it's time for you to take your passion for the government and for the ordinary average people just trying to live and work and play. It's time for them to have a voice. So if you feel compelled, we will support you. And when they did the redistricting in Oregon, I noticed that I had been in District 3, which was basically, northeast Portland and through Rockwood and Park Rose and that area, and that just is not my environment, how I grew up. When they redistricted and I looked at the map of the new District 5, those are my people. Those are small towns, rural communities, unincorporated communities. I live in Malino. That's an unincorporated community. In 2007, the Clackamas County Board of County Commissioners offered the unincorporated rural communities an opportunity to form themselves into hamlets or villages. So Malino jumped right on it. We got the petitions going. We are now recognized. We are a recognized government entity that comes under the umbrella of the county commissioners. I have been on that board from day one, first as secretary treasurer, now I am the vice chairman. No interest in being the chairman. It's a pretty busy job, and I enjoy coaching the boys tennis team at Malala High School. I've done that for 19 years now. I've gotten to know a lot about the different cultures in the community that I live in. There's a heavy Hispanic culture, and I've coached quite a few Hispanic young men over the years. Super fun to be invited to their sisters' quinceañeras, their graduation parties, just things that they do to celebrate in their culture has been rewarding to me. I'd never been exposed to that until then. Really grew up in a very homogenous community, and so being able to, and the Russian community, the same thing. There's a heavy Russian community out there, and coaching boys that are part of the Old Believer Russian community has been, super eye-opening and awakening for me. And just out of curiosity, I just constantly ask questions, and they're just like, I don't even know the answer to that. So they'd go home and they'd ask their parents, why do we do this during Easter? And so it was almost like, they're just like, I don't know, we just always have. I'm like, well, find out actually why you do that. And they just came back and said, wow, we do this because of this biblical tradition or whatever. And I'm just like, that is super cool. So it really is the community that I live in, very culturally diverse, and it's been fun to get to know the different cultures just through my coaching. And when I accepted the coaching position, I never really realized that it would be way more than teaching kids how to play tennis and competing against other schools. It became, into a part of my community that I had not been, unfortunately, exposed to before.
So why are you running for Congress?
Why am I running?
Is there a particular issue?
There it is. I agree with Jimmy that inflation is hurting everyone. I've been talking to farmers for the last couple of weeks, and they're just like, taxes and inflation are going to ruin us if we don't get a handle on it. But to me, the last week or so, I've been really researching, and it's more the reason why there's inflation. That's what needs to be attacked. The reason why there's inflation is because the government just keeps printing money and giving it away, and there's nothing to show for it. There's no product being produced, there's no time being given. It's just printing money out of thin air and giving it to people without any work or material being produced. And that's what causes inflation. More money going out without anything representing it.
So I have a version of this question for both of you, but let's start with Jimmy. You ran for Congress.
Yes.
You lost in the primary.
Yeah.
Why not run for a local office?
I believe that the federal government has an outside influence on what happens within Oregon. I look at our timber industry especially. When I was a kid, we had 85,000 timber workers. We now have 25,000 timber workers, so we basically lost 60,000 blue-collar jobs. And I think that the federal government is directly responsible for that. We used to harvest 50% of our timber off the federally managed land. That number is now down below 10%. If you look at communities throughout Oregon, it's been devastating. Now, these are smaller communities, so they don't get the same attention. But I make the comparison with what happened to Pittsburgh in the 1980s, where, when the steel industry died, they lost 25% of their population. That's happened throughout Oregon. But when it happens to a town of 10,000 people, it doesn't get the same attention. And now I think, 30 years later, we're losing, 1 million acres of timber a year to forest fires. And I hold the federal government directly responsible for that. I think that their management of the federal lands has been extremely poor. And we are losing billions of dollars of assets. Not only that, but it is incredibly dangerous for the communities that it happens in.
So same question to you without the history. Why not move up to a job in the legislature or run for legislature or county commission?
Well, right now in the legislative district, both Senate and representative in the state of Oregon, I have wonderful representatives. They're doing a good job, they're experienced, they have their finger on the pulse. Why would I run against someone who's doing a great job? Plus, from the time I was a teenager, my whole focus and interest has always been the federal government for some reason. When Winston Churchill said, that at some point you're going to, figuratively, you're going to get a tap on the shoulder, where you will have an opportunity to do something that your talents and your qualifications and your interests will be able to benefit. And that's where my talents lie, is in my knowledge and understanding and focus of the power that the federal government does have and should not have. The federal government is way huger than our founding fathers ever intended it to be. They intended the federal government to be small and that the state governments would be what governed and managed and helped the people. And it has gone just completely opposite. The federal government's so huge that it's hard even for state governors to go to the federal government and say, hey, we need help with these forest fires. These are national forests that are burning down and you've done nothing for 10 years. And now they're burning down. And then when they do burn down, you put regulations on us being able to log the timber that's burned down, and now just a mess. So it's time for states to take their power back, and it's time for people in the federal government to do that. I also believe in term limits, and unless we can actually start controlling and limiting the power that the federal government amasses to themselves, then the states are just going to be the minions to the federal government instead of the other way around.
This is a question for both of you, but what role do you think climate change plays in Oregon's forest fires?
You want to go first or me?
You go ahead.
Let's face it, once a forest fire starts, the amount of emissions that go into the atmosphere is more than what did they say, than what our automobiles do in 10 years. A forest fire burns for 2 months, and just look at all of the smoke and the pollution and the toxins and the CO2 and everything that's just going up 24/7 into the atmosphere. To me, that plays as big a role in adding to the change in the climate as does the cars we drive. And I think that the way that we're attacking climate and pollution and things like that is false. We think solar panels and electric cars are great, but the carbon footprint for making those things, because they're made in foreign countries where they have no laws. China has no environmental laws. If we built those things here in the United States under our environmental laws and regulations, it might make sense, but we don't. We want them cheap, so we ship them over. But the carbon footprint, and there's no way to recycle them. So all the solar panels after their 15 years of usefulness, all the windmill turbines after their 15 to 20 years of usefulness, end up in a landfill because there's no way to recycle them. So right now, although they're trying to develop the technology, I think that the carbon footprint for what we consider green energy is actually worse because it's not local and it's not recyclable.
But do you think that?
I think that there's a shift in the. I think there's a shift in the climate.
I'm just trying to understand. Do you think climate change exacerbates forest fires? Not that it, do you think it's a cause? Or?
I do not think
Okay.
it's a cause. I think mismanagement of forests is the cause.
Okay.
And then Jimmy.
And stupid people out there starting fires in the middle of the summer. I mean, that's usually how they start.
Yeah, like during the
some
burn
bonehead
bans.
kid with the fireworks out in the gorge setting off fireworks when it's super dry. That's what started that huge gorge fire. That's what people are just so ignorant to how to behave in the forest.
And same to you.
Yes, certainly the 3% rise in temperatures that we've seen in Oregon does dramatically increase lightning strikes. So I think there's, forget the exact percentage, I think for every degree that the temperature goes up, there are 11% more lightning strikes. So that certainly has an impact on the forest fires. Yeah, but I mean, it's much more complicated than that. I mean, the Forest Service budget was cut by 75%. And, when I was a kid, as I said before, we had 85,000 timber workers. So you basically had 85,000 firefighters that were in the forest. So whenever there was a fire that erupted wherever it was put out almost immediately. And unfortunately, we've lost that capacity.
So are you running on a platform that wants to increase the federal government? Or at least in that regard, do you want more forest workers back in the forest?
Yeah, but I mean, they're not federal employees.
Oh, you were saying timber companies being in the forest. I
Yeah.
misunderstood. Okay,
Sorry. There are
Okay.
85,000 timber employees.
Okay, sorry.
No, but I mean, yeah, clearly we need, the Forest Service's budget right now has been
I just
decimated.
want to make sure I understand. So, in terms of the role of climate change, in terms of Oregon and wildfires, you gave the lightning strike example,
Sure.
but do you believe that, the drier climate than usual plays a factor? Like, I'm trying to understand, I guess, your grasp on climate change and how you think that factors into Oregon's issues.
Yeah, drier conditions obviously lead to forest fires. Yeah, I mean, I think it's direct causality. The science is pretty clear. I mean, the New York Times did a very fascinating article on the wildfire this summer down in southern Oregon, and it basically talked about there was a managed area by Oregon State University where they had thinned the forest and they cleared out the underbrush, and that area survived much better than the areas that had not been worked on, that were just left for 30 or 40 years without any management. So
And is your current occupation is energy investor? That's what you do now for a living?
No, I wrapped up my fund in 2019.
Okay.
Yeah, so.
So are you full-time campaigning
Yeah,
right now?
full-time campaigning.
Okay,
yeah.
gotcha.
And since Tess asked about sort of rounding out resume, the district lines were redrawn and then you moved back?
No, I live in Bend.
Oh, you live in Bend, okay,
Yeah.
you still live in Bend.
Yeah.
Okay, and have you, what kind of civic engagement, or what have you done since your last run? That would be in the category of civic engagement.
There hasn't been civic engagement since the last run.
Okay.
I had a bit of a cooling off period. We started a clothing company with friends based in Colorado and here. Actually, our designers are based in Portland, so it's a golf clothing company. So we launched last May, which was exciting. So. Yeah.
I didn't know that. That's awesome.
Yeah. So, well, nobody ever asked.
No one ever asked.
No one asked.
You
What
just got asked.
What have you been up to?
have you been doing since the
How many
last
times
run?
have we been doing this? And this is
Well,
the first time I've ever seen it.
I mean, people don't care really.
Can you give me what endorsement in this race are you most proud of?
I was endorsed by Oregon Right to Life, so that was a big endorsement.
For obvious reasons, like it speaks to the base of voters who will.
Yeah, I mean, in a Republican primary, it's a litmus test for.
Did they endorse solely you, or did they do others?
solely,
okay.
yeah.
Okay. And how about you?
How about me?
What endorsement would you say you're most proud of, or?
I don't have any formal endorsements. I haven't really gone out to seek formal endorsements.
Okay.
I've been talking to people, individual farmers, individual community leaders and members, individuals, not organizations.
Great. Is there somebody who's served in Congress that's a role model for you, or an elected official that you would like to emulate?
Ronald Reagan. I mean, he really, I really appreciate he was willing to reach across the aisle. He was willing to listen to multiple sides, not even just two sides, but he always realized there was a third side, and he would listen. It's all about listening. And throughout the course of this campaign, I've started talking less and listening more, taking more opportunity to have people ask me questions and answer what's on their mind instead of me telling them what should be on their mind. Because everybody has unique circumstances, and in order to represent people, you have to listen to what it is they need from you, because that's really what it is. I'm not running for Congress. District 5 is running to choose someone to be their voice. And that's how I approach this. One person out of this whole geographic area that we call Congressional District 5 is going to go to Washington, D.C. and be the voice for every single man, woman, and child in that district. And talking to the people and asking them what it is they need from their representative is super important. But yes, Ronald Reagan did that better than anyone I've ever noticed over the years.
And how about you, Jim? Is there
A legislator or president? Or?
I mean, I was thinking of a congressman or woman, but
Okay.
if beyond that you have.
Yeah, no, I mean, I admired Greg Walden and his work. I thought he did a phenomenal job being a spokesman for Oregon. I worked for Gordon Smith, so I know he's not
He's a rock
I know
star.
he's not a Congress, he's a senator, but I also thought Hatfield was an incredible example of an independent voice in Oregon, who was a remarkable man. So. Maybe that's a little too provincial.
There's no wrong or right answer.
I mean, you're absolutely
It's just to reveal something about yourself. I would say, in our editorial endorsements, like the one value that I'm certain we're looking for is an ability to think independently. So this is a usual question in our endorsement interviews for members of all various parties, but is there a way that you highlighted Oregon Right to Life as like you're a representative of the base? Is there a way that you can demonstrate you think independently of the typical Republican?
I am a huge proponent of trade and free markets. I would say, I thought the Trans-Pacific Partnership would be highly beneficial for Oregon businesses, farmers, semiconductor industry. As one of 3 states that borders the Pacific Ocean, I thought it was critical to open up the Japanese markets to our beef and the trading links. And I also think that it would have been a much better way to isolate the Chinese economy, which we've clearly seen is not necessarily a friend to their neighbors or to our economy in general. And now you're seeing that the Chinese are actually applying to that trade partnership, which is changed in name now. I forget the exact wording of it, but it's basically the same countries that were aligned at the beginning, between South America and Southeast Asia and Japan. I think that for Oregon, having those markets would be critical to be open. So I do see certain aspects that I would be an independent voice in that function.
How about you, Laurel?
Some of the problem with being able to be an independent voice is that when a bill comes before Congress, like they're trying to tackle an issue, immigration, inflation, energy, costs, someone drafts a bill to try to address and tackle that problem, and then all sorts of states and special interests and things start tacking on their little pork pet projects to where you have an infrastructure bill to help build 5 failing bridges throughout the United States, and that's what the bill is. Before it's done, there are 20 non-affiliated projects attached to that, to the point that at some point even the framers of the bill have to vote no for it, because it's going to just add to the national debt, it's going to reward different states and different special interest groups. We need to keep our legislation simple. A citizen ought to be able to go online and read a bill, and a bill should not be 2,000 pages long. The citizens of the United States have a right to be able to read the bills, call their senator or their representative and say, look, I'm concerned about this bill because here's how it's going to affect the blueberry industry, or the filbert growers, or the timber industry. And then there's all these other things attached to it. What does daycare have to do with infrastructure? But all sorts of pet projects start getting attached instead of being standalone, and then you're left with having to vote for a mess or voting no, and then when you're up for election, your opponent says they voted against
So
No,
you're
building the
you're the distinction you would draw from between Republicans in Congress right now is that you would want to simplify legislation.
I think that legislation needs to be simplified so the citizens can know what's being legislated, not find out later that there were 25 other things that put us into more massive debt because in order to get what we needed, we had to give people what they wanted.
All right.
So Idaho recently passed a bill that's, dubbed the heartbeat bill, an abortion bill that restricts abortion rights. Did you support that bill, or, what's your opinion on that type of legislation?
Idaho's bill says to 6 weeks, right? You have up to 6 weeks.
I believe so. I think
There's one state that's trying to just ban it altogether. What is it, Oklahoma?
Might be a few, yeah. I'm not sure. off the top of my head.
No, but I mean, the governor's out there pushing hard. I cannot in good conscience tell a woman who's a victim of rape or incest or domestic violence that she is obligated to follow through with a pregnancy that was a crime perpetrated against her. All that being said, I am a very religious woman and I am pro-life all the way down the line, but I am not pro-continuing to abuse women who've already been victims of crime. But can we come to some sort of a conclusion that by 12 weeks you need to make your decision? Because after that, technology has proven that the baby does feel severe pain.
Is your stance that the, rape, incest, pregnancies can be, or the cutoff applies to those pregnancies specifically?
No, any woman who wants to choose that.
Okay.
That abortion is not the issue I'm willing to, die on. Because when it comes down to it, women have been getting abortions for thousands of years. And it's more the heart of the woman and the culture of a society that either makes a woman embarrassed or ashamed, or she's looking down the barrel of being in poverty or lower income if she has a child and keeps a child.
That sounds like some independence from the traditional Republican.
Oh, it seriously is, yeah. I am not a traditional Republican when it comes to that because I have too many women in my circle of friends who have had to make that excruciating decision. And whether you keep the child and now you're an unwed mother, society still, as progressed as we are, society still looks down their nose, although we give resources and we have, resources available to try to help women who are raising their children alone. Statistics show they end up lower income and in more of a poverty level than if a woman had had an abortion. So I would rather change that culture and keep her stable and her income high, but right now, society is against her.
And how about you, Jimmy?
I haven't read the bill, so.
Well, you have the Oregon Right to Life endorsement, so I figure you know now. What's your opinion on heartbeat bills in general? I mean, those have been a big topic in this country for the past at least year.
Yeah, I need to read more about these bills, to be honest with you, to speak specifically about them.
Do you think so do you believe abortion should be legal in any circumstance?
Yeah, rape and incest and, an abusive situation, yeah.
And do you have a stance on the cutoff date?
I don't know.
Okay.
Do you have other questions?
I have, one more.
Okay.
You want me to go? Okay, well, I'm looking at your voters pamphlet. I'll ask this to both of you, but you said our cities are experiencing record crime, making it impossible to feel safe in your own home. So if you were elected, how would you, from Congress, how would you help mitigate crime in Oregon?
It's a great question. It's a local issue, but at the same time, I think it's important. The morale of the police force, I think, is critical. And I think that having a representative in the area that is behind the police force is critical. What we've seen with 150 early retirements / people quitting from the Portland police force has been devastating. We've now seen a 300% rise in the murder rates in Portland, pre-pandemic levels. You know, we're at a 25% increase over the all-time murder rate as of last year. And this year, the trend appears to be continuing.
So is the solution more police?
Absolutely. I mean, I think everybody recognizes that. Even the city council tried to hire back 82 of those officers.
Not one took them up on it.
Yeah, the challenge is like, yeah, they have tons of vacancies in Portland. I know this is a congressional race,
Sure.
but so it's not totally
But-
relevant directly, but
Right.
nobody wants to be an officer in Portland. So,
Right.
like, how do you change that?
I mean, standing behind the police force, I think, unfortunately, they were attacked openly by a lot of the people that were representing the city of Portland, unfortunately. You know, when you have a city council member saying that there are false flags, that, you know, Molotov cocktails are being thrown by police officers, that's not helpful for the police department. I think, you know, it's important.
District attorneys that won't prosecute if the police do arrest them is a huge problem also. If the police are doing their job and then the district attorney just says, I'm not going to prosecute this, then why would a police officer even put themselves in the position to go out and arrest dangerous criminals if they know within 2 hours they're going to be back out on the streets?
Is there any ways besides hiring more cops, you know, for either of you that you think could curb gun violence? And, you know, that could be in Portland or it could be, you know, nationwide, since this is not a Portland-only problem.
The huge problem, crime, mental illness, and drug abuse are it's a vicious cycle, three-way. I think a lot of the crime is being committed by drug addicts, and the drugs that are on the streets now coming unfettered across our southern border. Until we shut down our southern border, the evil that's coming across our southern border is poisoning our whole way of life in the United States.
You mean the U.S.-Mexico border?
The U.S.-Mexico border, 90% of the fentanyl that is killing people in massive numbers is coming across the southern border from Mexico. And that is causing, they're doing tests on these drugs and they're saying, these are not the drugs even of 10 years ago. They're causing mental illness almost immediately. The addiction just grabs immediately and someone is just devastated mentally, even just experimenting once or twice. And so then all of a sudden you have this perpetual problem, and then just the need to get more drugs causes them to commit crimes. And the crimes are, you know, the police are overwhelmed. My husband stopped a shoplifter at Home Depot in Oregon City a month ago. He was stealing a table saw, and my husband had a pipe in his hand. He was loading it onto his truck, and he knocked the table saw out of the man's hand. And the man was just high as a kite. And Home Depot said they're not even going to call Clackamas County Sheriff because they can't do anything about it. So it's just this vicious cycle. Crime is being caused because people are addicted to drugs.
Do you think the government would you support funding government programs to address addiction?
If they'll shut the flow of it in the southern border. Once it's here and people are taking it, yeah, we can spend billions of dollars helping that, but wouldn't it help to reduce the supply in the first place? If it doesn't ever make it to the streets, maybe the resources could help those who are drug addicts now, but we're just adding more and more and more every day.
And sorry, one last question on that. So can you elaborate on what you mean by shutting down the border? Like, do you mean, who would you want to limit access to the United States?
People who are criminals, who are already convicted criminals, people who do not have documentation. There's ways to get documentation to immigrate to the United States, and I am fully for that. This is a nation of immigrants. My community has lots of immigrants. My community has a lot of undocumented immigrants, and they deserve to have the federal government address that problem. The legislature, when someone's up for election, They always run on comprehensive immigration reform, but when they get elected, they do not do it. They expect the president to sign executive orders that only put a Band-Aid on it. The legislature needs to address, there's a lot of wonderful people living in this country undocumented. That's not who I'm talking about. They're working, they're living, they're valuable parts of their community. But it's the people who are drug trafficking, sex trafficking, guns are flowing across the Mexican border. A lot of the crimes are being committed by guns that are coming up from the Mexican border, especially like in Texas and Arizona and California. The border states are seeing it and feeling it a whole lot more.
And Jimmy, I just want to give you a chance to answer too. The initial question was, are there any solutions besides hiring more police officers that you think would help curb gun violence?
I mean, the police, obviously, we had the gun violence unit that was canceled in Portland, which was a huge mistake in retrospect.
But that's just, that's still the same, that's more police, that's a unit of police officers.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fairly clear the evidence of what happened when we lost 150 police officers, when we ended the gun violence unit. The murder rate went up 300%.
So what did the gun violence unit do that reduced gun violence?
I think their connections to the community were critical. We were talking about long-standing relationships in the community, so that they could end a tit-for-tat between two rival gangs by speaking with the leadership and within those organizations. And by losing that institutional knowledge, it really hurt. Those were relationships that were developed over, a 20-year police career. And by disbanding it, it was obviously extremely detrimental to the city. Yeah.
All right, I don't have any more questions.
All right, well, given that we're running long, I'm just gonna move us on to the last question of our interview, which is a fun question, at least for us.
Okay.
It's not too bad this year,
No,
but
it's not as bad as
the question is, what back to normal joy have you experienced that kind of marked an end, at least of a phase of the pandemic? What was a moment that stood out
or
for
like,
you?
Yeah.
Do you want to go ahead?
I lead the congregational music at my church. And so when it was time to sing hymns in praise, I could take my mask off, but my whole congregation, when we were finally able to go back to church in person and start fellowshipping with each other, and I'll tell you, our elderly just were so excited to be back in church and worshiping together. But I have 3 little granddaughters who are in our congregation. My son and his wife and their 3 daughters live in our congregation. And so to be able to be up there and to see my 3 little granddaughters' faces, and they've got the hymn book open, and I'm smiling at them, and for the first time in 2 years, they're looking at me and their faces are beaming and they're smiling back and they're singing at the top of their lungs. And it's more like I'm leading a choir at this point, because everybody's so excited to be in church and to be singing hymns.
That's lovely. Thank you. Jimmy?
How am I supposed to follow that answer?
Tell us yours.
Come meet my granddaughters. You will be changed forever. They are amazing.
Oh man, you put me in a tough position, Miss Roses.
Sorry, Jimmy.
Or
That's
like our editor, one of his examples is he got to go to a Blazers game.
Right.
Oh,
Well, so I mean,
yeah.
mine is super lame, but it was just, there was a birthday party that was supposed to be the 40th birthday party the first week of January, and we just did it April 1st. But it was just exciting to go to a birthday party, which seems so elementary, right?
Yeah.
But, at the same time, it's a joyous occasion to get together with friends. And I mean, I hope we're done with it. I mean, this Philadelphia's got me a little worried, and I don't know what's going on, but yeah, it would be nice to be through the other the side, right? I mean, this has been a tough 2 years for everyone.
You guys didn't even ask for our vax proof or anything. Or not happen to wear masks. This is probably unusual for you too.
Well, yeah, because I started in January 2020, so this is my first election cycle doing in-person interviews. It's so much better than over Zoom.
You were doing Zoom.
Yeah.
Right, and recording it through Zoom.
Yeah, which is just not the same.
For a whole year, I taught my early morning seminary class. I teach the kids at Malala High School an early morning seminary class. And yeah, I did it Zoom every morning. Those kids were logged on at 6 o'clock. It was awesome, but it was like they were in their pajamas, brushing their teeth, and I didn't care. They still wanted to learn and to sing and to interact.
Yeah.
So I hear you. The Zoom just didn't quite do it.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, at least you don't have to do debates on Zoom.
Did you do a debate? Oh, the last time you ran
The whole
against Vince?
cycle. Yeah, it was
Oh
like,
my gosh, I
there'd be
can't
remember
like
election
25 people watching. Like, nobody's paying attention.
Yeah, but could you sling your dirt easier?
No, because you can't. There's no reaction.
You don't know
There's
how to
no
answer
clapping.
them.
There's
So
no-
anticlimactic. Oh my
Well,
You can at least pretend you lost an internet connection if you don't know how to answer.
Well, I mean, my campaign
Anyway.
manager would write on a yellow pad, be like, smile. Because you're sitting there for 2 hours, 2.5 hours on camera, and you're like, finally just like kind of tune
face is
out.
frozen.
Well, I mean, it's
Thank you both for coming in.
You're
It was
welcome.
a pleasure to meet you both.
Yeah.
And our issue will be about a week from